Good morning. I'm Matt Driskill, editor of Age in Aviation magazine and ageinaviation.com. Welcome to the latest In Conversation, sponsored by Metrojet of Hong Kong. Today we're in conversation with Vivek Keerthy, practice lead for strategy at CAPA India. Vivek, welcome to In Conversation. Thanks for joining me.
Good morning, Matt. Thanks for inviting me to In Conversation. Happy to be here.
Good to see you. First of all, everybody knows aviation around the world was hammered last year. IATA said actually it was the worst year in history for the industry. Give us an idea. I mean, we actually, sometimes we don't hear that much about India or South Asia, but India in particular. Give us a big picture of what's happened in India with airlines there, airports, sort of give us the overall look about what's happening there.
Yeah, sure. Let me start off on the global front as well, just to give an index of what's happening globally and India. So prior to COVID-19, the airline industry was ready to take off again on a strong note, and it was going to mark the industry's 11th consecutive year of profits. But however, post the financial crisis in 2019, the past decade, that is from 2010 to 2019, has been the most profitable ever in the airline history. COVID-19 has had a profound impact on this, and as IATA has stated in their latest statements, a net loss of 118 billion is what is expected of 2020. The global RPKs have gone down by about 65.9% compared to 2019. Now, coming to the India front, as probably you may have heard in the news, so India suspended all flights, domestic and international, from the 23rd of March and 25th for international, respectively. And domestic flights were then periodically started in a limited manner from the 25th of May. The Indian domestic market, the RPKs have declined 55.6% in 2020 compared to the same period last year. The government has also been playing a crucial part all the way through, and recently they have extended their decision to deploy the 80% capacity of pre-COVID up to the 31st of March. Now, if we come to the financial performance of Indian Airlines, if we look at the two major airlines, which is Indigo, so they have incurred a total of 646 million in losses in the first three quarters, while SpiceJet have so far recorded a loss of $106 million in the first three quarters. As probably many of you know as well, Air India, which is the flag carrier of India, generates roughly about 60% of its revenues from international operations, which has significantly been impacted, and we don't expect that to recover much as well in the near future, immediate future. So we believe from CAPA that this fiscal year, Indian Airlines are expected to post a total net loss of up to $4 billion.
That's a lot, especially considering, I mean, before COVID-19, India was basically on track to become the third largest aviation market after China and the U.S. And one thing that was interesting, and let me make sure I'm pronouncing this right, the UDAN Regional Connectivity Scheme, and airlines, Indigo and everybody else, they were buying planes left and right. With vaccines kind of being rolled out, and there's actually some interesting news on the levels of COVID-19 in India. If I'm not mistaken, I think they've dropped, actually. But with vaccines coming along as well, give us an idea for the outlook for the year. I read the other day that the head of Airbus in South Asia said that things are possibly looking better, but that India was still in the eye of the storm, in his words.
That's right. Yeah, good points. You did get UDAN right. UDAN is the right pronunciation. The civil aviation industry in India has actually emerged as one of the fastest growing industries in the countries over the last few years. Pre-COVID, India actually did become the third largest domestic market across the world, and it was expected to overtake the United Kingdom in 2024 to become the largest air passenger market, inclusive of international traffic. In 2019, just before COVID, so India's passenger traffic, airport traffic, stood at 341 million, which was growing at a compounded rate of CAGR of 11% over the last 5 odd years. Now, to cater to this rising air traffic, the government has been working quite meticulously as well, and they have increased the number of airports that are operating in India. So as of last year, India had 103 operational airports in all, and also they envisaged increasing the number of operational airports to 190 to 200 by the year 2040. The rising demand in the sector has also pushed the number of airplanes in the region. And as the head of Airbus stated, of the 566 aircraft that were delivered globally, a little more than 10% were actually delivered to Indian carriers, of which Indigo got about 44 of them. So Indigo has a total of 580 planes on order as well with Airbus, and they're approximately receiving about 50 a year. So the number of airplanes in India are also expected to rise to about 1,100 by the year 2027. So those changes are good, and I think from an India perspective, there is forecasted growth in the future. The UDAN scheme, which you rightly mentioned about, so that's a very key component of the National Civil Aviation Policy, and that was basically launched for the development of regional airports and aimed at enhancing connectivity to remote and regional parts of the country. Recently, in the fourth round, there were 78 new additional routes that were awarded, which has taken the total number of UDAN or Regional Connectivity Scheme routes to 766. Again, going back to COVID, as you know, so India is a country with a population of 1.3 billion people. And we in India launched its vaccination drive on the 16th of January with an aim to vaccinate roughly about 300 people by the mid of this year, by July of this year. India remains on track to reach its pre-COVID domestic aviation traffic, hopefully by the end of the year. And the vaccination rollout is further going to boost demand in traffic. Again, if you look at the last 2 months, there has been quite a lot of demand, and I think the domestic travel has been upbeat more so. There are various challenges that we completely agree, and especially international travel continues to remain weak. And it's very hard to decide exactly when it would recover. So CAPA India believes the full recovery of international traffic would only happen in financial year 23-24 as a minimum.
Well, that was my next question, actually. It was talking about international travel, because the head of Airbus was saying that is, in the future, that's an area that Indian Airlines could really focus on. And I think we've seen some of that with flights to the Middle East and other places. Are airlines like Indigo, I mean, Air India's, and we'll talk about this later, but Air India had most of the international travel, but do you see some of the other airlines stepping in to take that, to take their place?
Yeah, I think it's a buoyant market. So with the collapse of Jet Airways a couple of years ago, that's left just Air India as the major international airline in India. But slowly we are seeing the emergence of other airlines as well in India. So Vistara, which is in alliance with Tata and the Singapore Airlines, so they're looking to expand globally. They have added a number of international routes and recently have also got delivery of 2 Boeing 787s. SpiceJet is also looking to expand their international long-haul horizon as well. So you will expect them to be flying to a lot more international destinations soon. It is challenging. I think currently the Middle Eastern carriers pretty much take 25% of international traffic out of India. And I think Indian Airlines would look to capitalize on that front more so. So it's a hard to decide or deduce what's going to happen. But I think with the new fleet, especially in the 321 XLRs, there'll be a lot more scope for narrow body long haul travel, which I think is where a lot of Indian players may play a huge part. So I think we will expect significant competition, which is going to arise in India over the next few years.
Let me jump in here. Let's talk about travel bubbles for a second. Singapore and Hong Kong had great hopes late last year that they would be able to open a travel bubble. Some of the ASEAN countries have been talking about it. The quarantines and outright border closures in some cases, that has absolutely been killing international travel. It's my understanding that India, though, has been working on travel bubbles. Can you talk about those?
Sure, sure. In fact, I think India was one of the first few countries that actually started these bubbles or agreements between a number of countries. Given the large number of Indian expat population, it became imminent that they have to do something about it. So a travel bubble or an travel arrangement is nothing but a temporary arrangement between two countries, which is aimed at restarting commercial services when international scheduled services are not operational. So India began their first bubble with the United States, France, and Germany way back in July. So they've had mutual agreements with the governments and airlines of these countries. And currently they operate travel bubbles to 25 countries. And this is spread across Asia, Middle East, Europe, Africa, and even North America as well.
And to be able to handle those bubbles, I mean, does that require a COVID test before pre-departure and those kinds of things?
Yeah, I think things have emerged over time. So I think initially it was mandatory to have a 2-week quarantine. Then it was moved to a 2-week home quarantine. Testing was introduced. It was briefly, it was removed. But I think with the new COVID strains, especially from the UK, which has, again, a large Indian diaspora and a lot of flights from India to the UK, the South African variant as well. So in fact, the ministry has just announced new measures as of yesterday, where it is mandatory to test for a number of arrivals from various countries, including Europe, parts of Middle East and Africa as well. So yes.
Yeah,
and airports are equipped with testing facilities as well as of today.
Yeah, the quarantines are tough. My wife actually flew back from France, and she was in quarantine for 2 weeks here in Singapore. So we had to send care packages to her all the time. Last question before we go to the break real quick. Airlines and airports have been working on touchless or contactless applications for things like check-ins, more automation, and they were headed this way. To be fair, they were headed this way before the pandemic start, but it seems like the pandemic has sort of accelerated the investment in the use of technology. Are we seeing that in India?
Absolutely. I think, as you rightly said, digitization, self-service were big topics across the globe, even before COVID hit. I think COVID has only accelerated the process completely. As a start, in fact, India did not even have mobile boarding pre-COVID, and that's something that has accelerated quite a bit. So the ministry, the civil ministry out here, has actually made it mandatory since May of last year to web check-in for your flights before departure. So which was a big fundamental change. And accordingly, a lot of airports have also upgraded a lot of their systems and are more capable of touchless, seamless experience. So there's a lot happening in this space, but equally, even before COVID, I think airports like Delhi, Bangalore, and Hyderabad, which are kind of in the front edge leading technology out here. So they've been working on seamless biometric-based projects as well to enhance the whole passenger experience. I think Delhi Airport as well has been looking to install touchless scanning, the advanced body scanners. So they were due to come in before COVID, but due to a few reasons that has got delayed. But hopefully we should see them in airports and enhanced security touchless experience is what all customers seek for.
Okay, great. Vivek, we have to take a very quick break to hear from our sponsor, Metrojet in Hong Kong. So we'll be right back after this.
We're going to have the crown jewels of Asia, and I promise you we're going to have the nicest and busiest business aviation hangar in the region.
And we're back. Vivek, as we talked before the show came on, I've been to India many times, starting way back in 1990. It's one of my favorite countries in the world. But like a lot of places, and I include France, where I used to live, the government's very much involved in things there, and there's lots of paperwork involved for everything. But India, I think especially, and we can blame it on the British, I think. It's always, you can always blame the British for everything.
That's true.
But there's a lot of government red tape involved in everything aviation related, and not just federal government, but also multiple state governments if you're operating around the country. Do you think there, and I know there's lots of moves afoot to sort of try to get the government out a little bit, but would the industry be better off if the government loosened its grip on things like fuel taxes, MRO charges on parts, importation, those kinds of things?
Well, firstly, incredible India. It's definitely one of the oldest civilizations in the world, and India has such a myriad landscape, heritage, culture, and of course the great food as well. So it's a country people love to visit, but as you rightly pointed out as well, there are challenges, which I think the government is trying to ease over the last few years in particular. But I also personally feel it is important for a developing nation that the government has some proactiveness in the development of the travel and tourism industry, which I believe the Indian government is pushing for quite hard. They're committed to eliminating any structural barriers and investing in a strong tourism market and a brand building of the nation as well, which will all lead to liberalization, which is what I think a lot of countries look forward to, and that's key for any growth as well. And if India wants to be the leading aviation sector and grow and prosper, and basically in turn you bring in more taxes to the country as well, I think that is an important element. Again, as you pointed out, so there have been a number of changes the Indian government has introduced. The flexible use of airspace is one which has recently been adopted. So this strategy, where civil and military users can use the airspace, will benefit a large number of players. So more direct routings will, of course, save time and reduce operational costs for a number of airlines. ATF, as you rightly mentioned. So this is still a topic of discussion, but it is likely to be included in the GST regime, which will further reduce costs as well for airlines. MRO, again, another point you mentioned. So a number of MRO players have been seeking a level playing field for a number of years to bring down the taxes on par with countries such as Singapore and Dubai. As probably you will know, the MRO market in India accounts to roughly $1.2 billion US. You'll be surprised to hear that nearly 90%, in fact, about 90% of this work used to go overseas just because of the high GST tax that existed. But again, recently in the recent budget, the government has decided to reduce the GST rate on MRO services from 18% to 5%. So that is going to be a big change as well in the market. And given a lot of airlines, as we discussed, Indigo, SpiceJet are ordering a number of new fleet as well, new aircraft. The new age, new fleet, which are more fuel efficient, will definitely bring in a lot of cost savings for these airlines. So hopefully all of this added up, the ATF, the flexible usage of airspace, the MRO changes would benefit the industry out here.
Well, while we're on this topic, let's talk a little bit more about privatization. I mean, the government, Air India, flag carrier. I actually have flown Air India a couple of times, a long time ago. But the government's been trying to sell it off. First time didn't work out very well. This time it's been slow going. COVID-19 has not helped. We had people were saying, okay, you mentioned Vistara and Singapore Airlines before, that maybe they might be interested in it. We've seen reports about that. But also the government's been talking about privatizing airports, and I think I was on a CAPA India webinar the other day where there was a big discussion about privatization of airports or public-private partnerships, those kinds of things. Give us an idea of where we stand with, first of all, Air India, and then also on the privatization of airports.
Sure. I think Indian aviation definitely needs privatization as a step forward. It's not the expertise of the government to run airports or airlines, and they need to be looking forward to maximum governance and minimum government. So that's the model that we are seeking out here. Privatization of Air India, as you know, has been ongoing for a number of years, and it's likely to spill into the next fiscal year. So 21-22 is when we should likely see the sale going forward, but it's definitely going to happen, hopefully this time. The government has extended the expression a number of times. There have been failed attempts since 2017 to bolster the appeal to investors and increase the likelihood that the business will recover under private ownership. The government announced that it would retain a portion of the debts and after privatization as well. So they're kind of sweetening the deal all the way through. And concluding the sale will be a big victory for the current government, which they've been aiming to do since 2016, 2017, actually. So they also, in fact, the government's also pushing a lot to limit their undertakings in the public sector. And I think selling off Air India will be a big win for the government. Coming on to airports, I think a lot of privatization has been happening in this space as well. I'm sure you've heard of the Adani Group. So they have acquired about 6 airports recently. They've also acquired a 74% stake in Mumbai International Airport from GVK. So there's a lot happening in this space as well. And recently, the government also announced that they're going to start privatizing the Tier 2 and Tier 3 city airports from 2021, this fiscal year, basically. So I think in all, you would see a lot of privatization happening on the airport front and Air India, of course, as well.
Well, and I have to say, actually, I've seen there's a huge difference in the airports from when I flew in my first time in India to Mumbai in 1990, I guess, or 91, 92. And today when I flew to Mumbai and then flew out because I got upgraded to first class, which is very nice. But the difference in the airports, the infrastructure, the service levels, and all of those things is just amazing. I mean, it's just a completely different ballgame now with what's going on there in India. Let me ask you another question, and our time is running short, so I want to get these last couple of questions in. We talked about the government. We talked about, lots of governments have their fingers in lots of pies and everything. We've seen, for example, the government here in Singapore just announced an 870 million Singapore dollar package to help the aviation industry. Do you think the Indian government is doing enough for the industry as a whole there?
Yeah, it's a different market here, and I think the industry here has been looking forward to financial help, a demand that has been put forward as early as May of last year for reduction in taxes, immediate help in the future, which will improve operations of airlines. Lowering of ATF, so as we discussed earlier, so the aviation turbine fuel, so that's a big topic. Because that pretty much covers about 40% of costs of majority of airlines out here. Airport charges have been quite high in India as well, and that's something they're looking to seek to reduce as well, so parking, landing, navigation charges. But again, as I mentioned earlier, I think a number of changes that the government is introducing. So we probably don't have a free cash purse like many of the international governments to give out, but I think incentives which are from be it on the MRO, the reduction in the GST, your flexible usage of airspace, the likelihood of ATF coming under GST. I think these are the key fundamental things that the government has kind of done and contributed to recovery of airlines out here.
Last question, Vivek. I always try to end these shows on a bright spot. It's obviously the last year has been terrible, but is there a bright spot that you can see in India for this year or looking ahead? What can we look forward to from India?
Absolutely. Again, if you read media reports, India has been recording a steady decline in the number of daily cases since October of last year. Indeed, the national recovery rate is actually the highest in the world. Fatality rate, as they say, is just about 1.4%, which is one of the lowest in the world. So there's definitely hope from a recovery from COVID. If we then move on to the economy perspective, so again, we had a budget quite recently. It is expected this fiscal year is going to grow at about 11%. So yes, it does compound for a lower growth last year, but we would expect to see a much higher growth in the coming fiscal year. Subsequently, we will see a 6 to 7% growth in the Indian markets over the next few years. So it is looking positive. And coming to the airline perspective, I think international travel would continue to remain a threat, and we're uncertain what's going to happen when. COVID restrictions, we were hoping things were better, but then the new strains have further put stress. So it's hard to determine what's going to happen on the international front, but the domestic traffic is on path to quick recovery. And in fact, India is actually one of the fastest recovering markets globally. And the government, as I mentioned earlier, there was a cap of 80%, which likely is going to be lifted completely in the next month or so. Also, from an Indigo perspective, if we look at their data, Indigo being the largest airline in India, majority of their fleet are back in the sky. So it's just a handful that are now grounded on the ground. So there is hope. And I think against global trends in the aviation world, India has actually managed to recover at a much faster pace. And I think we all look for 100% recovery very, very soon. And back to normal life.
Well, we hope so. Vivek Keerthy, Practice Lead for Strategy at CAPA India. Thanks for joining me in conversation.
Thanks, Matt. Pleasure to have been here.